There's an image that defines a generation. A man in a perfectly tailored suit, emerging from the shadows with lethal precision and effortless charm. For decades, we've watched this figure seduce, strategize, and survive on screens around the world. The world knew him as invincible. Yet behind every suave gesture and calculated smile stood a boy who spent his entire childhood learning that love and loss were inseparable. The real Pierce Brosnan story isn't about espionage or high-speed chases. It's about a man who became James Bond precisely because he knew what it meant to be abandoned. And more importantly, it's about the hands he held when the camera stopped rolling, hands that told a story far more compelling than any script ever could. If you've ever wondered who Pierce Brosnan really is beneath the legend, stay with us. This is his journey. On May 16, 1953, a boy was born in Drogheda, Atha, a small town in Ireland. His name was Pierce Brosnan. His father's name was Thomas, and the most important fact about Thomas is this: he left when Pierce was too young to have any real memories of him. What Pierce would inherit instead was a lifetime of questions that could never be fully answered. By the time Pierce turned 4 years old, his mother May had made a difficult decision. There was work to find in Ireland, real, stable work as a nurse, but she had to leave to find it. London called. Opportunity demanded sacrifice. And so this boy, who had already lost a father, now lost his mother to distance and necessity. For the next several years, Pierce lived with his maternal grandparents. Home became a shifting concept. Grandparents passed away. He moved to an uncle's house. Then, eventually, he found himself in the boarding house of a woman named Eileen Riley, a woman whose name deserves to be remembered because she became the constant in an inconsistent world. Years later, when Pierce looked back on those years, he didn't describe hardship. He described gratitude. "My grandfather was the hand I held," he would recall. And in Eileen's house, despite the gloomy exterior, the small iron bed positioned beneath a window, shielded by newspapers and green curtains, Pierce found something that might have seemed impossible given his circumstances. He found joy. In that modest room, with walls that blocked out the world, Pierce's mother sent him something that transcended the physical distance between them, an old projector. And with that projector came images. Mickey Mouse dancing across the ceiling, Donald Duck taking flight on painted walls. A boy lying in an iron bed was suddenly transported to kingdoms he'd never visited, stories that belonged to him as much as they belonged to anyone else. But there was something even more powerful that his mother sent. One Christmas, when work kept her from returning home, when the distance proved too great and the sacrifice too real, she sent something that would sit on his bookshelf for decades afterward. Boxing gloves. Just boxing gloves. Pierce never felt the need to explain why he kept them. Because somehow, those worn leather gloves communicated what no letter ever could. Love isn't always about proximity. Sometimes it's about showing up in the only way you can, even when it's not the way you hoped. In August 1964, when Pierce was 11 years old, everything shifted. His mother appeared in person. She brought not just herself, but stability, a new husband named William Carmichael, who would become the father figure Pierce had never had. And she brought him to London, to a new country, to a new life. That first month, the family took him to see a film called Goldfinger. On screen, Sean Connery embodied everything this Irish boy wasn't: composed, confident, dangerous in a way that seemed effortless. But walking out of that theater into the London streets, Pierce encountered a different kind of reality. He was the Irish boy. The accent marked him. The background shaped assumptions about who he could be. So he did something remarkable. He claimed the identity before anyone else could weaponize it. He embraced being the Irish boy, not as a liability, but as a fact that belonged to him. At 16, Pierce left school with a portfolio of drawings and began studying commercial illustration. Art was supposed to be his path. But then something unexpected happened. He stumbled into a drama class. It wasn't his intention to become an actor. Acting simply found him. But when it did, everything changed. For a boy who had spent his childhood moving from house to house, always watching, always waiting, always trying to fit into spaces that weren't quite his, the stage offered something revolutionary, a place where presence mattered more than origin. where what you could do superseded where you came from. He pursued this new passion with the intensity of someone who had found a home. 3 years at the Drama Centre London. Classes that demanded absolute discipline. Every gesture analyzed. Every line stripped down to its essential truth. The boy who had learned to adapt, who had survived by observing and adjusting, now discovered that these skills could become art. When acting came to me, it was a liberation, he would later say. But liberation, he was about to discover, comes with a price. When Pierce graduated from the Drama Centre in 1975, there was no agent waiting, no contract, no promise that talent would be enough. What there was instead was work. Real, grinding, unglamorous work in regional theater. He took roles in productions like Wait Until Dark. They weren't flashy. They weren't the parts that make you famous. But they demanded something deeper than fame. They demanded excellence. Every night, he had to earn the right to perform again the next evening. Every performance had to captivate an audience that had paid to be there. Then, in 1977, Tennessee Williams cast him as McCabe in The Red Devil Battery Sign. After witnessing Pierce's performance, Williams sent him a telegram. It was brief, but it carried everything. "Thank God for you, my dear boy." It wasn't a guarantee of stardom, but it was validation from one of theater's greatest minds. And gradually, the doors began to open. By 1980, Pierce appeared in The Mirror Cracked alongside Elizabeth Taylor and Angela Lansbury. That same year, he was in The Long Good Friday with Bob Hoskins and Helen Mirren. The roles were brief, but they were accumulating, building a resume, building a presence, building toward something larger. Television opened wider doors. The Manions of America introduced him to a broader audience. Nancy Astor earned him his first Golden Globe nomination. But the role that would transform everything came in 1982 on American television. In October 1982, Pierce Brosnan became Remington Steele, the mysterious, sophisticated con artist who played opposite Stephanie Zimbalist's Laura Holt. For 5 seasons, millions of Americans invited him into their homes every week. He brought wit. He brought danger. He brought an effortless charm that audiences found irresistible. And he brought something else. He brought James Bond into the living rooms of America, years before he ever actually played the role. Because of Remington Steele, people began to imagine Pierce as 007. They saw the tailored suits, the composed confidence, the way he could convey both menace and magnetism in a single glance. Audiences didn't just watch the show, they cast him in the role they wanted him to play. In 1986, when Roger Moore stepped away from the Bond franchise, those imaginings seemed about to become reality. Pierce was offered the role. Finally, after years of fighting for every opportunity, after climbing from regional theater to television to film, the ultimate prize appeared to be within reach. Then his agent called, but not with good news. The problem was NBC. They still held the rights to Remington Steele. They might want to produce more episodes. Bond producers wouldn't allow their new 007 to be tied to a television series. Pierce was assured everything would work out. The option period was only 60 days. Surely it would be resolved. It wasn't. On the very last day of that option period, as Pierce was heading to meet Cassandra, carrying a bottle of champagne to celebrate on the beach, his phone rang. NBC had decided to produce additional episodes. The deal had collapsed. Timothy Dalton would become James Bond instead. It was a shock, Pierce would later say, with the remarkable understatement of someone who had spent his life learning that disappointment was simply part of the equation. Then he went back to work. While the world was watching Pierce pursue his career, something equally important was happening in his personal life. Somewhere in the mid-1970s, when he was still struggling for recognition and his future was entirely uncertain, he met Cassandra Harris. Cassandra came with 2 children from a previous relationship, Charlotte and Christopher. And in that family unit, Pierce discovered something he had been searching for his entire life without fully knowing it, a home that wasn't temporary. A place where he belonged not because he had earned it through performance or adaptation, but simply because he was wanted there. When Charlotte and Christopher's biological father passed away, Pierce made a choice that went beyond marriage. He adopted them. He gave them his name. He became, in every meaningful way, their father. And in 1980, when he married Cassandra, he wasn't just marrying a woman. He was choosing to build the family unit he had never had. In September 1983, their son Sean was born. Pierce was still fighting for bigger roles, still grinding through auditions and minor parts. But within his own home, he had already achieved something more important than success. He had found fulfillment in being a husband and a father. Cassandra understood the uncertainty of an actor's life because she had lived it herself. She had appeared in For Your Eyes only years before Pierce would ever play Bond. She encouraged him. She helped him make impossible choices. She stood beside him through every rejection and every small victory. Their home was filled with the sounds of family life, children's laughter, conversations about work, the everyday bustle of people who chose to build a life together. It was everything that Pierce's childhood had never been. It was permanent. It was secure. It was love that didn't require an explanation or an apology. In 1987, while filming The Deceivers in India, Cassandra began feeling exhausted in ways that sleep couldn't fix. Her abdomen swelled. The symptoms multiplied. When they returned to London and doctors performed surgery, they discovered the truth: ovarian cancer. The diagnosis didn't just change Cassandra's life. It rewrote the entire family's existence. She underwent 8 surgeries. She endured approximately 18 months of chemotherapy. But Cassandra didn't become a passive patient. She learned about her options. She made her own medical decisions. She fought with the kind of dignity that comes from knowing exactly what you're fighting for, not just your own life, but the life your family would have to continue living. Pierce describes himself during those years as a quiet presence. He was there. He held her hand through the treatments. He stayed beside her when the test results came back uncertain. He was the steady force in a world that had become terrifyingly unpredictable. Sean, their young son, responded in his own way. He pretended to be a doctor. And in the way that children have of understanding what adults are struggling to accept, he used that role to care for his mother. He would stay by her side, keeping her company, making her feel less alone in the exhaustion that chemotherapy brings. Even as illness tried to rewrite their story, the family refused to let it become the only thing their story was about. There were still moments at their Malibu home where friends would see the children laughing and splashing in the swimming pool while Cassandra watched from the sidelines, still present, still mothering, still living even as the disease tried to claim her. Just 2 days after chemotherapy treatments left her exhausted and her hair beginning to fall out, she walked the sloping grounds of a property with Pierce, imagining their future there, deciding to buy it. That house became a sanctuary, a place where she felt at peace. During those years, Pierce also rediscovered painting. He picked up a brush and created art with his own hands, channeling the fear and helplessness into something tangible, something he could control in a situation where control was an illusion. As Cassandra's condition worsened, the available treatments gradually revealed their limitations. There were no more options. No more strategies. Just the reality of what was coming. Pierce later admitted something that would haunt him. He never asked Cassandra if she was afraid. There was a silence between them that he couldn't break. But Cassandra's determination remained extraordinary. About a week before her final hospitalization, as Pierce struggled with confusion and anger about the injustice of it all, it was Cassandra who comforted him. They had almost nothing left. But they still had each other. In the hospital, they held hands and prayed. A priest left passages from the Bible. Pierce, the man who had memorized countless lines on stages around the world, tried to read them aloud beside his wife's bed. But the words wouldn't come. He fumbled. He apologized for not reading them properly. Cassandra leaned closer so she could hear him. She smiled. And in what would be the last words Pierce would clearly hear from his wife, she said, "Always the actor." Even at the end, even facing the end, she saw him. She understood him. She loved him. On the morning of December 28, 1991, one day after their 11th wedding anniversary, Pierce held Cassandra in his arms while staying on the phone with their daughter Charlotte in London. A few minutes later, Christopher arrived. Cassandra passed away at the age of 43. That afternoon, Pierce returned home and lifted his young son Sean onto his lap. He told him, gently, that his mother was gone. Tears filled the little boy's eyes, but they never fell. Sean simply whispered that his mother would no longer be in pain. Pierce sought out a psychologist to help both himself and Sean navigate the grief. But he also made a deliberate choice. He would not hide his tears from his children. He would show them that grief was something you could feel and survive simultaneously. He chose work that allowed him to leave in the morning and return home each evening. He stayed in constant contact with Charlotte. He provided stability for Christopher and Sean. 4 months after Cassandra's death, Pierce shared something with the world. She is still present in every part of who I am. The world had no idea that this man, this actor who would soon become James Bond, who would embody sophistication and control on screens everywhere, had just had his entire world shattered. The resilience that audiences would later admire in his performances had been forged not on any stage, but in hospital corridors and quiet moments when two people held each other's hands and faced the unfaceable together. For 8 years, Pierce carried the disappointment of 1986 with him. He continued building his career. He appeared in The Fourth Protocol alongside Michael Caine, playing against type as a colder, more dangerous character. He appeared in Mrs. Doubtfire with Robin Williams and Sally Field, proving he could seamlessly transition between genres, from threatening to romantic to humorous to remarkably restrained. The world was watching him succeed. But James Bond remained the role that got away. Then, in 1994, 14 years after first meeting Cassandra, 3 years after her death, the phone rang again. This time, it was different. This time, the answer was yes. Timothy Dalton had stepped away from the franchise. The producers had changed their minds. On June 8, 1994, Pierce Brosnan was officially introduced to the world as the 5th James Bond. 2 days later, while filming Robinson Crusoe in a remote part of Papua New Guinea, local children recognized him from the international news announcement. They surrounded him, shouting in unison, "James Bond! James Bond!" It was a moment that encapsulated everything. The role he had lost, the years he had waited, the life he had built in the interim, and now, finally, vindication. GoldenEye premiered in 1995, after the Bond franchise had been silent for 6 years. The Cold War was over. Audiences had changed. The uncertainty about whether Bond could survive in a post-Cold War world was palpable. Pierce brought something new to the role. He combined the sophistication that had defined Remington Steele with a tougher, grittier edge that suited a new era. When he looked at Judi Dench's new M character, there was a tension, a clash between old approaches and new realities. He was sophisticated, but he was also dangerous in a way that suggested internal conflict, not just external threats. The film opened to tremendous success. It became an international phenomenon. It earned more than $350 million worldwide, making it the highest-grossing Bond film of its time. For Pierce, it represented something more than box office numbers. It was the culmination of a journey that had begun in regional theater, progressed through television, survived rejection and disappointment, endured personal tragedy, and finally arrived at the moment when the boy from Ireland became the world's most famous spy. The world had waited to embrace him as James Bond. But they had never imagined the weight he carried into that role, the memory of Cassandra, the responsibility to his children, the understanding that fame couldn't protect you from what mattered most. When Pierce adopted Charlotte, she was still a little girl. She didn't come with a famous father, she came with a stepfather who chose her anyway, who made her part of his family, who gave her his name. Charlotte grew up surrounded by the film industry. She watched her father's career unfold. She understood from an early age what it meant to lose a mother to ovarian cancer. She lived through her father's grief. She learned, impossibly young, that love and loss were intertwined. As an adult, Charlotte built a life that was deliberately quiet, deliberately grounded in what mattered. She built a home with her partner Alex Smith. They raised 2 children together, Isabella and Lucas. Within the family, Charlotte was known for the simple joys she created, the laughter, the stories, the presence of someone who showed up every day and made her children feel seen. Then, nearly 20 years after watching ovarian cancer claim her mother, Charlotte received the same diagnosis. Pierce had already traveled this road once. He knew the surgeries. He knew the chemotherapy. He knew the way hope and fear become indistinguishable. He knew how to show up quietly beside someone facing the unfaceable. Throughout 3 years of treatment, Charlotte did everything she could to continue being a wife, a mother, a daughter, and a sister. And Pierce did what he had done before. He stood beside her. By June 2013, Charlotte's time was running out. But something miraculous happened. Just weeks before her death, Charlotte married Alex, the man with whom she had built her life, the man who had stood beside her throughout her illness. That day wasn't about fighting the disease. It was about love. It was about family. It was about gathering the people who mattered most and celebrating what they had built together. For those precious hours, hospital visits faded into the background. Treatment schedules became irrelevant. All that existed was a woman, the man she loved, and the people who loved them both. On June 28, 2013, Charlotte passed away in London at the age of 41. Alex was by her side. Their children, 14-year-old Isabella and 8-year-old Lucas, were there. Her brothers Christopher and Sean were there. Pierce wrote only a few brief lines in his public statement. He called her his beloved daughter. He asked everyone to pray for her children. He asked for a cure to be found for the disease that had claimed both her mother and her daughter. A year later, Pierce appeared on Stand Up to Cancer in 2014. He spoke about Cassandra. He spoke about the last time he held Charlotte's hand. He spoke about watching his family lose 2 generations to the same disease. Then he fell silent. He didn't need to say anything else. The image said everything. A father who had held his wife's hand through terminal illness. A father who had held his adopted daughter's hand through terminal illness. A father who understood, in a way most people never have to, what it means to be powerless in the face of the people you love most. The greatest gift his family left him was not their absence, but the profound understanding they gave him about what matters. Cassandra had shown him that dignity doesn't disappear when the body fails. Charlotte had shown him that love can continue even when time runs out. Charlotte is remembered for the qualities that cancer could never take from her. The ability to make people laugh. The presence that made people feel loved. The mothering she gave her own children. And in his family, she continues to live, through Isabella and Lucas, through the memories that her father and brothers carry, through the love that didn't end when her life did. In Cabo San Lucas in 1994, 3 years after Cassandra's death and before GoldenEye made him internationally famous, Pierce met Keely Shea Smith. She was working as a journalist. They met at a party in Mexico. Their relationship began as something fragile and new. Pierce's family was still carrying the pain of earlier losses. He didn't need someone to rescue him or replace his past. And Keely never had to compete with the memory of Cassandra. What they built together belonged to an entirely different chapter of life. Keely brought to the relationship not just companionship, but conviction. She was a journalist passionate about environmental issues. She later became a filmmaker and activist. Long before they married, Pierce stood beside her in environmental campaigns and charitable initiatives. They shared a love for the ocean, for wildlife, for the future their children would inherit. Their marriage wasn't built on Hollywood romance alone. It was built on family life and a shared commitment to something larger than themselves. Their first son, Dylan, was born in 1997. Paris followed in 2001. On August 4th of that year, Pierce and Keely were married at Ballintubber Abbey in County Mayo, Ireland, in the country where Pierce's story had begun, surrounded by both of their extended families. That ceremony united a family filled with memories. Cassandra's enduring presence. Pierce's older children. The young sons he and Keely were raising together. This wasn't a new family designed to replace what came before. It was an expanded family, one spacious enough to hold both the losses of the past and the hope of the present. Pierce and Keely have always described their marriage in simple terms. He spoke about growing through each year together, about appreciating one another, about preserving harmony. She summed it up with 2 words, best friends. But those words contained worlds of meaning. They weren't claiming that one person had rescued the other. They were describing something far more difficult and far more real. A partnership built through daily choices, through years of showing up, through raising children together and supporting each other's creative work and pursuing shared goals even when no cameras were watching. Dylan and Paris grew up between Malibu and Hawaii, close to the oceans their parents worked so hard to protect. Each eventually began building a creative path of his own. Pierce continued acting and painting. Healy remained committed to journalism, filmmaking, and environmental advocacy. Their family never separated itself from the losses of the past. But neither did they allow those losses to become the only thing that defined their lives. Together, they created the stable home Pierce had rarely known as a child. Not perfect, not untouched by sorrow, but sustained by presence, friendship, and years of shared life. Pierce played James Bond in 4 films: GoldenEye, 1995, Tomorrow Never Dies, 1997, The World Is Not Enough, 1999, and Die Another Day, 2002. A decade of worldwide recognition. A decade of defining the character for a new generation. A decade of proving that he had been right all along, that the role belonged to him. But Bond also gave him something beyond stardom. It gave him the financial security to establish Irish Dreamtime, his production company. It gave him the power to shape projects beyond the image of 007. It gave him the platform to direct attention toward causes he believed in. In 2002, his final Bond film was released. But the ending he received wasn't the one he deserved. In 2004, while filming After the Sunset in the Bahamas, Pierce received a phone call from his agent. The negotiations were over. Producers Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson spoke with him personally, briefly, confirming that the franchise would be moving in a new direction. Pierce thanked them and said goodbye. Years later, he admitted that the unexpected ending left him with a sense of emptiness and the feeling that there was still unfinished business. The disappointment was undeniable. But it never overshadowed what playing Bond had given him. Nor did it define what would come next. His first answer to that new chapter was The Matador. Instead of portraying another flawless hero, Pierce played Julian Noble, a weary, unstable hitman whose loneliness, vanity, and dark humor stripped away the calm sophistication associated with Bond. He also served as a producer. The performance earned him a Golden Globe nomination in 2006. Critics and audiences embraced him in a role that explored vulnerability far more than elegance. His later choices pushed him even further away from the Bond persona. Mamma Mia paired him with Meryl Streep in a film overflowing with sunshine and longing for family. The November Man brought him back to the spy genre, but in an entirely different way, giving him the opportunity to create a new action hero without repeating 007. It wasn't the move of an actor who had lost his chance. It was the choice of an artist learning how to use his fame without allowing himself to be imprisoned by it. Bond continued to follow him through interviews and premieres. But Pierce has never denied that saying goodbye broke his heart. Nor has he ever needed to diminish Daniel Craig to explain his own disappointment. Over time, Bond became just one chapter in a much broader career, alongside comedy, drama, independent films, producing, painting, and roles far removed from the spy who had made him famous. He kept working. He embraced challenges that Bond would never have allowed. He proved that losing the tuxedo didn't mean losing the artist who had worn it. Christopher Brosnan was born in 1972 during his mother Cassandra's marriage to Dermot Harris. When that marriage ended, Pierce didn't just marry Cassandra, he adopted Christopher along with his younger sister Charlotte. He gave Christopher his name. Growing up in the film industry, Christopher studied screenwriting at UCLA and directing at the New York Film Academy. He worked behind the camera on several of his father's productions: Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, The Thomas Crown Affair. There was a time when father and son worked side by side, sharing the practical responsibilities of movie production. But in 1991, when Cassandra passed away, Christopher was only 19 years old. Pierce could see the pain in his son's eyes. He could see the emptiness her death had left in his heart. In the years that followed, Christopher struggled with addiction. The family did everything they could to help him. But Pierce learned what every parent eventually learns, that support and love, however genuine and consistent, cannot force another person to choose recovery. By 2005, Pierce spoke of Christopher as a deeply lost man. He described an acceptance that comes not from giving up, but from understanding a difficult truth. Parents can care. They can provide opportunities. They can always stand behind their children. But they cannot make the decision to recover for someone else. Creating distance never meant stopping loving him. It was simply an acknowledgement of reality. Despite years of separation, Christopher has never disappeared from the love Pierce holds for his family. In a Father's Day message in 2022, Pierce included Christopher alongside Paris, Dylan, and Sean, writing, "My love for you is forever, my dear sons." In November 2025, Pierce, Christopher, and Dylan were seen leaving a family dinner together in Notting Hill. One evening isn't enough to conclude that every wound has healed. Neither father nor son has publicly spoken in detail about the state of their relationship. But that image still carries profound meaning. Father and son were once again together in the setting of family. Not as strangers. Not as estranged relatives performing an obligatory duty. But as people who had once worked together, who shared a history, who were making their way back to the same dinner table. Christopher's story shouldn't be viewed solely through the lens of addiction or estrangement. He is a son who lost his mother at a young age. He is a film student who studied the craft alongside his father's career. He is a member of production crews who once worked alongside the man who adopted him. Pierce's decision to establish boundaries cannot erase that shared journey. Just as one family dinner cannot erase more than 2 decades of hardship, what it offers is something far simpler. A sign that perhaps the door between them was never completely closed. That even after many years apart, a family can still find its way back. Pierce Brosnan cannot change the losses that shaped his family's life. But he has refused to allow their meaning to remain confined to hospital rooms or private memories. Since 2001, he has served as a UNICEF Ireland ambassador, consistently speaking out for children's rights. After Cassandra and Charlotte both lost their lives to ovarian cancer, he announced the creation of a research initiative dedicated to developing more effective treatments for the disease. Together with Keeley, he has spent years supporting environmental campaigns. From protecting the gray whale habitat at Laguna San Ignacio to opposing an industrial energy project off the California coast, the fame James Bond brought him became a way to direct public attention toward people and places that might otherwise never have received the same recognition. At 73 years old, Pierce continues to create. He remains involved in new projects like The Giant and Mobland. Painting continues to be an indispensable part of his life beyond the screen. By his side are always Keeley, his children, his grandchildren, new roles, and the memories that have never left his family story. Cassandra is still remembered. Charlotte is still remembered. Christopher is as well. Time has brought new people into his life and new reasons for hope. But it has never demanded that anyone forget those who are gone. As a child, Pierce remembered his grandfather as the very first hand he ever held. Many decades later, he held Cassandra's hand during the heartbreaking farewell that only love can make bearable. Years after that, he held Charlotte's hand in the same way. Those moments leave a deeper impression than any tuxedo ever could. Pierce's life is a story of a boy who spent his childhood searching for peace. Of a husband who never left his wife's side in times of hardship. Of a father who never turned his back on his children. Of an artist who continues to stand before both the canvas and the camera well into his later years. James Bond made Pierce Brosnan a global star. But it is the hands he held that tell the complete story of the man his family has always known. If his films or his story have stayed with you, leave a few words for Pierce. Share the very first memory that still makes you think of him. And if you've made it this far, please subscribe, not for us, but as a quiet tribute to the man behind the role. A man who understands that the greatest adventures aren't always on screen. His story reminds us that behind every public triumph lives a private struggle. Behind every confident performance lives a heart that's been broken. And behind every loss lies the possibility of building something new, not to replace what was lost, but to honor it by living well. That's what Pierce Brosnan has done. And perhaps that's his greatest role of all.